So we're going to dive in and see how much we can look at in the letter to Philadelphia. So start in verse 7 with me. To the angel or messenger of the church in Philadelphia write. So let's talk about Philadelphia briefly. In a lot of studies I look at, they go into great details about the city, which is helpful, I think, if you're interested in that. But it doesn't always help you understand the letter. So I just want to give you a little sketch of the city so we can kind of imagine that they're real people in a real place. Right? These aren't just words on the page. These are words written to actual people living as a church together. And so if we can learn anything about them by looking at the city, we'll do that. If not, that's a study for a different time. So, Philadelphia, as you see from the letter, has a church that is under persecution. It's a large city. It was actually an old city that was bequeathed to the Roman Empire after the ruler without any heirs was dying. He decided to give it over to the empire, his whole kingdom, including Philadelphia. It was named Philadelphia because the one who conquered and founded it really loved his brother. Like deeply had a deep affection for his brother. And as you know, Philadelphia, phileo, is brotherly love or familial love or deep affection. So he named it Philadelphia just in honor of his brother. And his brother's the one who took it over and then bequeathed it to the Roman Empire. It was one of the 10 cities, or the Decapolis. Do you remember in the Gospels that there was a man who was healed of the demons, and Jesus told him to go tell people about what God had done for him, and he went to the Decapolis and told people about what Messiah, or what Jesus had done by God's power. And you read that and you're like, whatever Decapolis is. Well, that literally means deca, 10. Decagon, everybody, from geometry? Woohoo! Or decade, right? So deca is 10. Polis means city. So it's the area of the 10 cities. Well, this is one of those 10 cities. This gives you an idea that this is how far from Israel word about Jesus spread, even while Jesus is alive and ministering. This demon-possessed guy goes this far into the Roman Empire telling people, you won't believe what's happened over in Israel. And so that's why it's reported people from the Decapolis are coming to see what Jesus is doing over here in Israel because word has spread. So just an idea. The name Jesus wasn't probably new to Philadelphia after the resurrection. They had probably heard about him and his miracles and teaching ahead of time. And then when people come through and say, so they crucified him, by the way. Really? No way. He seemed like such a great guy. No. But God raised him from the dead. He's Messiah, So they kind of got part 2 of the story, I'm guessing, after Jesus' resurrection. One of the interesting things I learned about this city is that it was a launching pad for when the Greek influence was spreading after Alexander the Great conquered. He had a mission. He was an evangelist. Not for Christ, but for the Greek culture and language. So everywhere Alexander went, because he had been influenced by the Greek philosophers, he really wanted everyone in the world that he conquered to have benefit from the Greek culture and language. And Philadelphia was one of the staging grounds for evangelization of that part of the world for Greek culture. Now, you read some of the language of how Jesus speaks and you wonder, is Jesus repurposing this? And is he going to use his church there for a different kind of evangelism, a different kind of good news message? I thought that was kind of cool. What the world wants to use for its message, Jesus is like, well, we can use it for ours. The kingdom has come and the other kingdoms are going to have to deal with it. So that's really all I think we need to look at for now about Philadelphia. Now, we're going to obviously find out a little bit in the letter about what their situation is. And one of the things we find out is there's a Jewish presence, which is not unusual. Remember, the Jews were spread all over the Roman Empire at this time from what we call the diaspora, where they're taken out of their homeland under Babylon. They're sent back to their homeland under Persia, but not all of them go back home. In fact, only a minority do. Most of them stay spread out over what becomes the Roman Empire. And so there's a Jewish influence and presence just about everywhere, including Philadelphia. And Jesus has some harsh things to say about the Jews there. So we'll look at that. Okay, What does Jesus always start his letters with? There's a pattern, remember, in all 7 letters. What is his first focus whenever he starts talking to the church? What's that? Give it to the angel, and then as the message starts, he introduces himself in different ways with different details about himself. Now, so far we've seen a lot of repeats of what we saw in chapter 1 already. He describes himself again the way John had already described him. Now here, how does he describe himself?
One is holy and true.
All right. Now it's interesting. He says the one who is holy and true. And I want to look at these 2 descriptors. They're very familiar. I mean, these aren't like, ooh, let's dig in. Like, we kind of understand these words. Kind of. As I'm sure you know, I'm a word guy. And I always want to know, do I know that word? Really? Is there more of that word than I've thought I know? And we use the word holy a lot. We talk, actually, I think we try to clarify what that word means a lot. But I want to talk about this word in relationship to Jesus being uniquely that. And what does it mean that he decided to declare to them in this letter to this church? Why does he decide to declare about himself that he's holy? Why is it so important that he's holy? So anybody want to share, what do you understand the word holy to mean? Don't be nervous if you don't get the whole thing. I don't either. So just tell me what you know and what you think holy means.
So he wants everyone to be set apart.
Set apart is the literal meaning of holy. Now, just so you know, this is one of the words that religion in general, including Christianity, has taken from general usage and made it very religious. But it's one of the general usage words that has kind of been quarantined into the religious circles. But holy is something you could say about all kinds of things in your day-to-day life. Some of you have special dishes that stay put away until you have a nice family dinner like Thanksgiving or something. The fine china, as some have. The fine silver. Those are actually holy unto you. Because they're not common usage. You don't use them just, to give the kids a snack or something, to put food for the dogs out. So anything that you set aside for yourself for special purpose is holy unto you. Now you can consider that now. Anything that's holy unto God, you put that in there. This is something he has set aside specially for a purpose he has. It's not the common everyday to him. So when he says to Israel, I am holy, therefore you have to be holy. God declares he's holy, which is interesting. If he's set apart, he hasn't been set apart by somebody else. He's not specially purposed for something by somebody else. What does it mean that God is set apart? What do you think? If he's the I am, the origin, there's not someone greater than him setting him apart. So what does it mean that in and of himself he's set apart?
He is the only one.
Okay, so just by virtue of existence, he is different. He is, I love this phrase, the holy other. And we use the other holy here. Like whole. The holy other. Are there 2 L's in holy?
Yes.
I'm going to say yes. Okay. I have confirmation of 1 and 2 witnesses. The holy other means he's so unlike us. No, we're made in his image, so he's like us, but he's so unlike us. And there are so many scriptures that indicate this, and one of the ones I think most of us know is what he said about his thoughts. What did he say about his thoughts?
My thoughts are not your thoughts.
And my ways are not your ways. And there, how does he compare it? As far as the heavens are above the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways. Also, he speaks of heaven is his throne and the earth is his... That gives you a sense of his being apart from us. He's the language of the scriptures is so rich, and we could spend all night looking at this. He is exalted. He is in the highest. You know that language on the day of Jesus' entrance into Jerusalem. Glory to God, where? because he is in the highest heaven. We're here on earth, the lower area, and they understood there to be a place under the earth, Sheol. So there's under the earth, the lowest. There's earth, which is the second lowest. And then there's the heavens, atmosphere, outer space. And then there's where God dwells, in the highest of the highest of the highest of the highest. He is called, and I love this language too of the Old Testament. Most holy other is not in the Old Testament or the Scriptures. But in the Scriptures, he's referred to as the most, I just got chills, the most holy. Because there are set apart angels, there are set apart humans, there are set apart items, There's a set apart room in the Old Testament called the Holy of Holies. And then there's another set apart room called the Holy Place and all that. But in all of existence, there's one supremely holy one who is set apart in ways that nothing else can be set apart, and that is God himself. So, keep that in mind now. When Jesus comes to introduce himself and he says, I am the Holy One. Now, be careful. We're not talking about he's saying, I am the Father. We're the same being. But as we're going to see in Revelation 4 and 5, what Jesus has been given by Father is a place with him at the center of the throne of heaven, which means, as Jesus is the exact representation of God's being, Jesus is the fullness of God in flesh. These are all statements from the Scriptures. Anything true of God's character and nature, we can now know it is true of our Master Jesus, the Word, the Son. So if God is the most holy, his Son Jesus shares in that nature and that quality. He is the Holy One. In fact, that's not what it says, so I'm not going to change it. But I think we could very well read this and put in holiest. The holiest one. Who is set apart like Jesus? Who has the mission and the purpose Jesus has? We share in it, but it's not ultimately ours, it's his, right? Oh, it's so great. So Jesus is, as we talked about Sunday, the reason he can and should demand that you have more affection and loyalty for him than your own family members and your own life is that he is the holiest one. Your children are set apart for you? Of course. Your spouse is set apart for you? Naturally. Your family members and best friends, your church family, set apart in your life as not common, but very special to you. All of this is holy to you. But he's the most holy. Amen? Who compares to him? So, when we talk about this is Jesus, like in the other things he says, he's giving you a sense of the gravity of the one who speaks to you. And this is meant to perk up your ears. In the ancient world, any time that a king would address his people, he would remind the people of how great he is. And so, the words of King Darius, conqueror of nations, ruler of the 12, all that stuff, and it's long-winded sometimes. But just to remind you, you don't want to miss this. This is from the most important person in your world, And this is Jesus doing the same thing to the churches. You don't want to miss this. You're about to hear from the most important person in your world, right? Now, holiness has to do with set apart. Now, of course, as we see God's nature unfolding in the Scriptures, we start to connect moral purity to this. And I think that's fair. I just wanted you to know that's not the root meaning of it. But that's one of the ways it plays out. When you talk about God's holiness, haven't you been taught that has to do with how pure he is? He's not tainted by sin and all those issues. Well, that's one of the ways in which he is set apart. He's different. But there are also holy angels that, as far as we know, and we don't know all of it, but as far as we know, there's no indications the angels have ever sinned. So they're holy in that sense, but God is holy in that sense also. God is not the only being, perhaps, who's never sinned, but it's different for him. It's different for him. Because he, first of all, has existed much longer. He has way more power than the angels. He has way more opportunities to sin. And by the way, if God were to sin, who would he be in trouble with? If the angels sin, as some of them have, there's a major uh-oh for them, because there's someone who gets to punish them. If God sins, who's holding the big stick? Who's telling him to go get a switch? There's no one who gets to punish God. And this is one of the reasons, by the way, I'm so grateful. As I worship him sometimes, I think to myself, you could have been a different kind of God, and who could stop you? He could have been capricious and mean and change his mind every day of how he wants to do things, He snuffs some people out and he pops other people back into existence after a while in the phantom zone. I mean, he could do anything, anytime, and if his heart were corrupted, what are you going to do? You grovel and you hope it works out. But see, the fact that he's so good and strong and wise and kind and loving, all of that is our God. Because who could stop you if you were anything else? So, the fact that he is holy, the most holy, is one of the most worship-inducing statements about God. In fact, I wanted to point out something I'm sure you already know, but look at chapter 4. God willing, it won't be long before we're there, because I can't wait to get to chapter 4 with you. But chapter 4, verse 8, is where John sees some creatures, which will be interesting to talk about them, but there's some creatures in heaven who surround the throne of God. And day and night, now this is not all they do, by the way, which some people might think that's all anybody ever does in heaven is sing or worship. That's not all they ever do, but somehow they're able to, day and night, do this, plus do other things. But notice what they never stop saying. It doesn't say singing, by the way. It's probably more of a chant than a song. But maybe it's sing-songy chant. Who cares? Anyway, so what is it that they're saying day and night as a part of their existence in God's presence? Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty, who was and is to come. If you don't have that as a part of your worship prayer life, I really encourage you to. This comes out of me in prayer times a lot of times because why not? the beings that surround him every day in heaven are compelled by his holiness and greatness to say it to him. So I'm like, well, I'll join in because that's totally true. And by the way, do you remember, is this the first place this kind of language is used in a worship scene, in a prophetic vision? Go back with me to Isaiah chapter 6. And what's interesting, as we started this whole study by saying that the prophets are all the way through the book of Revelation. But what's interesting about this is that it's not an exact quote. The first part is, but there's a different ending to it in Isaiah's vision than there is in John's, and I just find that fascinating. Why did it change from one to the next? Now, in John's vision, he sees 4 heavenly creatures that are surrounding his throne. In Isaiah's vision, in chapter 6, does it say how many creatures he sees? It just says, in verse 2, above him were seraphim. All that means is plural. Because remember, the I am at the end of a Hebrew word means plural. So he didn't see a seraph, singular, he saw seraphim, plural. But we don't know how many. We know they have a lot of wings. They have 6 wings, right? But notice what they're calling out, and I love this detail, what they're calling out to one another. Yeah, this is Isaiah 6:3. And this is a chant that they are inviting each other to participate in. What are they saying here in Isaiah 6:3? Holy, holy, holy is the Lord Almighty. The whole earth is full of his glory. Oh, I love it.
My ESV says the Lord of hosts, but
Yeah.
all capital letters.
Right. So if I were to say this my own self, I'm not a Bible translator, but I would use the name of God there because that's what that represents. And of hosts, I think is the better way to say that. In the NIV and others, it says Almighty. Because the actual is of hosts, meaning of the armies or of the nations. Now Israel had hosts, which meant it had all these tribes with all these people. The teeming masses is another way of saying that. So Yahweh of the hosts of Israel is how some people read that. Yahweh of the hosts of heaven, which means the armies of God's angels. He has command over the angels, the armies of heaven. But the reason they say almighty is they say this indicates God's power, His might. And that's true, it does. But the reason I prefer of hosts is it actually paints a picture. In your mind, you're picturing teeming masses of angels or people that God has authority over. If I hear almighty, I'm just thinking, oh, He can do anything He wants. But this tells me He can do anything He wants, but He does it through others because He has authority over them. That's just a different message to me as I'm reading. So, holy, holy, holy is Yahweh of the hosts, which then connects you to the next statement. The whole earth is full of His glory. The hosts on earth even, right, are under His domain. This is a kingdom statement. God's kingdom, the glory of His greatness, extends throughout the whole earth. So, is there any question that God is holy or that Jesus is holy? Nope, it's pretty clear. By the way, one more thing before we move on to the true. Jesus didn't put much stock in the testimony of the demonized people He dealt with. He actually told them to shut their mouths most of the time. He didn't want their testimony about Him. But do you remember what some of the demon-possessed people would say about Him when they ran into Him? We know who you are, the Holy One of God, the set-apart one. Wow. Again, that's not like I get all excited about what demons have to say. But they saw something that the human beings couldn't be seeing. They had that spiritual insight as spiritual beings that the humans were catching up to them. We know who you are. The Holy One of God. Oh my gosh. Okay.
When I was reading that rhyme, it's just reminding me, verse 8 there, it says, then I heard the voice of the Lord saying, whom shall I send? And here am I. It's that song, Here I Am, where
Yes.
verse comes to mind.
That's right.
Now it's singing it in my head.
Yeah. And that text has inspired a lot of songs to that effect. Because you go from worshiping God and seeing His greatness in His temple, His glory fills the place, these beings are magnifying Him for His holiness, His glory throughout the earth. And after experiencing all that, He's like, I need to send somebody. Who in their right mind isn't going to be like, I'm ready, I'll go, I've just seen what I've seen, what else can I do? And that, by the way, is a part of the power of revelation. As you're seeing the scenes of heaven, you're getting this unbelievable, unmistakable sense of Jesus' and Father's glory. And you're supposed to be moved to say, okay, I'm ready. Whatever the world's going to do to me, whatever the enemy's saying to me, whatever threats are coming my way, I have seen Him. I know who I serve. Let's do this. So there is actually a really good connection between Isaiah's experience there, whoa, send me, and the whole effect that Revelation is supposed to have on us. Whoa, send me. Even if it kills me, send me. I'm ready.